Alto was a useless loser who was failing in his magic classes. However, everything changed when he stumbled on a mysterious book that summoned a freaky demon girl that showed him everything they don't teach in classrooms. One morning, Alto was informed by his teacher that his score for summoning class was 0, and even though he had good grades in other classes, he'd have to repeat the year if he couldn't summon a familiar. The teacher told him he had one more day to prove he won't be a kid protagonist, and bummed out by this, he walked to the corridor, and there he was met by Lilia, who asked what the teacher said. After he told her, she pulled out a rock from her bag and said she'd talk with the man, but Alto calmed her down and said he would try the summoning again. Later on, he went to the library to find a summoning book, and as he stood next to a bookshelf, a big-ass book coincidentally dropped on his head. When he picked up the book, he wondered if it was a summoning book, but decided to take it home. At home, he discovered that the book was actually a summoning book that followed the instructions in it. When the magic circle began to glow, he completed the summoning by dropping his blood on it, and when the smoke cleared up, he came face to face with a naked, big-plotted she-devil. She then approached him, but Alto accidentally fell to the floor, and as she straddled him, she asked why he had summoned her. He told her he wanted her to become his familiar, and almost immediately, there was a surge of energy in the room, and a seal appeared on her chest as well as the back of his right hand. After the contract was formed, she told him that she would take some of his mana as a reward for agreeing to be his familiar, and then kissed him. The kiss got him all hot and bothered that he laid down to catch his breath. The demon then told him that her name was Vermeil and said he could do as he pleased with her. As she was now his familiar, she began seductively touching his exposed chest, but Alto wasn't about to develop plot with someone he'd just met, so he told her to put on some clothes. After she got dressed, he explained what led to him summoning her. Vermeil said it was no surprise that other familiars had avoided him like a plague, and told him that his mana was too potent for them to handle. Alto then asked why she had agreed to be his familiar, and she told him that it was a small price to pay for him freeing her from the book. He pointed out that she was a demon and demons were known to be creatures of destruction, but she just laughed at his naivety. The next day, his teacher was disappointed that he had to pay someone to be his familiar just so he could pass. Alto tried to convince the man that she was his familiar, but the blockhead refused to believe him, so Vermeil pulled down her dress to show him the seal on her chest, which also gave the old geezer top view of her plots. After the class, Lilia told Alto that she didn't agree with the fact that he had a cheap skank as his familiar and challenged him to a duel. She said if he lost the duel, he would leave Vermeil in his room whenever he had to go out. When Vermeil asked what she was talking about, Alto explained that they settled fights with duels, and whoever won had the right to make the loser do as they wished. Vermeil then told him to accept the duel before telling Lilia that if Alto won, he had to do as he said. This seemed to make the dirty-minded freak begin to imagine different things Alto could make her do, but when she realized she was acting like a cultured simp, she stopped and agreed. When the duel began, Lilia summoned her familiar and used their combined powers to create a wind ball, which she shot at them. Alto tried to create a shield, but Vermeil got in front of him and asked him to trust her, so when the blast hit her, Lilia believed she had won. Unfortunately, when the dust cleared up, Vermeil stood before her unfazed as she smiled wickedly. She then told a scared Lilia that it was her turn before causing the girl to scream and make happy sounds. In the end, Alto was declared the winner, and he told Vermeil and Lilia that they were to do their best to become friends. When they tried to protest, he reminded them of the dueling rules, so they agreed to do as he had said. That night, Vermeil told Alto that Lilia was in love with him, but he said there was no way she'd like a go-go ripoff like him. She then told him that since she had done well during the duel, he had to reward her, so she kissed him. Later on, Alto asked why she needed to drain his mana, which made her explain that being locked up for centuries had weakened her, and said that his mana was the reason she could maintain her physical form. Alto then admitted that he was scared to have Lucifer's sugar mummy as his familiar, but after spending time with her hadn't been so bad. Vermeil told him that the only reason he could manage to keep her as a familiar was because of his strong mana, and told him that if he had a problem with having to kiss her to share his mana, she had a much more effective way to drain it from him and put Su's face. The next day, while they made their way into the school, Alto warned Vermeil not to do anything that would draw attention to herself, even though her melon-sized racks were the focus of all the males within a 1-mile radius. Just then, a student screamed for the others to take cover as a dragon was rampaging and heading straight for Vermeil and Alto. Vermeil waited for the dragon to get close before flicking it like a piece of garbage into the air, shocking everyone. Later on, during the morning assembly, Alto scolded Vermeil for using her strength in front of the students, but she told him she had only gotten rid of a problem, but he was now more worried about all of the guys around who were gawking at her plots like it was the Holy Grail. After the assembly, they went for their daily lessons, but Lilia didn't like how the skanky Vermeil sat so close to Alto during class. When classes were over, Alto walked home with Vermeil and Lilia on either side of him, but the two ladies didn't seem to like spending time with each other. Lilia voiced her displeasure, but Alto reminded her that the terms of their duel required them to befriend one another. Just then, an upperclassman called out to them, and the cowardly runt beside him pointed at Vermeil, saying she was the one who beat up his dragon. The upperclassman introduced himself as Rex, the dragon rider, causing the two dumbuses, Alto and Lilia, to scream in surprise, after which they asked if he was related to Hiccup. The wimps spoke up and asked them to stop playing dumb because they were the reason his dragon was considering facial reconstruction surgery. However, Vermeil ignored his accusations and asked who the dragon riders were, so Alto explained that they were a group of students who liked to delude themselves that they were the Targaryens since they all had dragons as their familiars. Vermeil then teased the boys, saying they were pompous brats who liked to show off their big tools. Rex approached her and asked what sort of spell they had used to take down the dragon, seeing as she was but a fragile human, so Vermeil told him that his pea-sized brain wouldn't be able to understand how things worked even if she explained it to him. Suddenly, she turned away from them, acting timid before suggestively asking if he wanted to do wicked things to her. The younger boy told her to stop acting like she was some innocent lass. However, they couldn't notice Alto sneak behind them until he activated a magic circle and trapped them in crystals. This act got Vermeil praising Alto for his ability to use advanced magic, but Rex told them not to get too cocky as he pulled on his necklace and summoned his familiar. Lilia scolded Rex for trying to pick a fight with an underclassman, but he ignored her and asked Vermeil to apologize for insulting him. He also said she could apologize differently as she was just his spec, but Alto didn't like that, so he stepped forward. Rex then ordered the familiar to shred them to pieces, but as it charged at Alto and the girls, Vermeil hugged Alto from behind and returned the mana she had taken from him the night before. The next moment, a golden magic circle appeared, and more crystals came up from the ground. It trapped the lizard_sorry dinosaur before extending towards Rex. To keep his campus big dog status, he managed to stand his ground and only got nicked in the cheek, after which Vermeil demanded he'd apologize to them. Rex accepted his defeat and apologized for picking on them, although he did so begrudgingly. Lilia also poked fun at Rex, even though she'd done nothing during the fight. That evening in Alto's room, he scolded Vermeil again for getting them into trouble, but she didn't seem to mind as she reminded him that the issue had been taken care of. She then flopped onto the table as she said being a student was hard work and told Alto that if he ever wanted to quit, she'd make him rich. Alto told her not to pull a money heist because she would get caught, before revealing that what he wished for was to become a powerful mage, which seemed to surprise her. Alto explained that their nation ranked the mages as Golden Square, Silver Square, Bronze Square, and Apprentice. Vermeil then asked if he wished to become a Golden Square mage, but he said he wished to surpass that and gain the title of Platinum Square, which was only given to a few who have gone beyond the Golden Square ranks. Vermeil pulled him in for a hug, and as he struggled to breathe under her massive jugs, said she knew she had picked the right master. After she let go of him, she promised to do her best to help him achieve it and began taking off her clothes. Alto asked the sneaky she-devil what she was doing. She told him she wanted to replenish the mana she had given him earlier during the fight.
Yeah, boy.
The next day, while they were making their way into school, Lilia met them and asked Alto why he looked like a homeless Gojo, so he told her that he wasn't able to sleep well. Lilia immediately blamed Vermeil for his lack of sleep, but before she could complain further, she was interrupted by Marcus and Cheryl, who were also second years. Marcus excitedly grabbed Alto as he gushed about how he heard Alto had defeated an upperclassman and was glad he made it his rival. Vermeil watched their interaction and asked Lilia who the delusional blockhead was, so she explained that he was their classmate. When Marcus stopped twirling him about, one of their teachers saw them and informed them that the headmaster would like to speak with 3 of them. Inside the headmaster's office, he told Alto, Lilia, and Cheryl that he had called them in because they were the top students in their grade and wanted one of them to become the student representative for the second-year class. He explained that all 3 of them would participate in a special trial, and whoever got a fairy flower by the time the 6 p.m. bell rang would be the winner. When they got to the enchanted forest, Marcus told them that only 1 flower bloomed in the forest, but Lilia asked why he was still with them, and he told her he would also participate in the trial. He then summoned his familiar and, doing a show and tell, ran off into the forest, but the next moment, the others heard his pathetic cry for help. He was in the mouth of a flesh-eating plant, so Cheryl had to stay back and help his miserable ass. Lilia and Alto soon found the fairy flower, but it was guarded by a Cerberus, which seemed to put a stop to their mission, however. Lilia pulled out a vial of invisibility potion. Alto asked why she had it, and she almost admitted she needed it to sneak into his room, but quickly came up with another answer, which he seemed to believe. He then pointed out that even if the Cerberus couldn't see her, it could smell her, but Lilia pointed to the dog and explained that it had a leaking snot, so it might be sick. She then drank the potion, but when Alto looked at her and saw that her clothes were visible, he told her that she should have borrowed Harry Potter's invisibility cloak instead. Lilia told him to shove his pie hole and said she preferred to be like translucent and go commando, after which she began taking off her clothes. She soon started feeling uncomfortable because even though she was invincible, she felt as though she was giving him a strip show, but she managed to brush off the thought and take it all off. As she approached the dog, she started feeling embarrassed, while Vermeil asked Alto if he was okay doing nothing as she reminded him that he was also a part of the competition. He then asked what the power she had shared with him the previous day was, so she explained that she had amplified the mana she took from him and given it back to him. Alto asked if she could do it again, and she told him there was no need for it as he could easily take down the creature, but said she needed more mana from him. She then dragged him to the floor, unbuttoned his shirt, and pulled up her dress before placing her bare racks as she started kissing him. Meanwhile, Lilia was discovered by Cerberus, was about to become its lunch, until Alto used explosion magic to draw its attention towards him. However, Alto asked her to get the flower as he fought it off, after which he called to Vermeil, who used a powerful spell to knock the beast out. After picking the flower, Lilia tried to hand it over to Alto, but her potion wore off at that moment, and she screamed in embarrassment. She also let go of the flower, which was carried by the wind, until it dropped in front of Cheryl, who picked it up just before the 6 p.m. bell rang. Later on, Cheryl asked if they were okay with her being the winner of the competition, and they told her that they didn't mind as she had won it fair and square. Some days later, Alto bought Vermeil crepes on their way to school, and she was so happy because they never made desserts like that during her time. This made Alto wonder just how much he didn't know about her, but before he could ask her about it, their attention was drawn to the dragon riders, who were doing a display in the sky. Later on, after PE, Marcus told them about the president of the Dragon Riders Club, Chris, and how she had founded the club. He said her skills were so exceptional that she was being scouted by the Royal Air Force. Marcus also told them that she was one of the 7 golden squares in the school, as well as one of the executives of the student council. Alto soon started fanboying because of this, so Vermeil turned to Lilia for an explanation of why these executives were so important. Lilia told her that of the 7 golden squares in the academy, 5 were executives of the student council. Alto also added that the president of the student council was going to achieve platinum soon, and said he wished he was the one. Suddenly, Vermeil placed her heavy jugs on his head as she told him he could become a gold square. Lilia immediately scolded Vermeil for showing her freaky-ass nature in public. Later on, while Lilia was in the changing room, she complained to Cheryl that Vermeil was up to something and said she was sure Vermeil was hiding something. Cheryl then asked if she liked Alto, but she denied it, saying she liked her men looking like Zora without a shirt on. However, Cheryl knew better and told her that if she wasn't careful, the seductive minx Vermeil would take her dream man away. Lilia thanked her for the advice but suddenly realized that she hadn't seen Vermeil for a while. Meanwhile, Vermeil was in the boys' changing room, and Alto wanted to die of embarrassment because Vermeil had followed him in. After leaving the changing room, Alto scolded Vermeil for not waiting outside like he'd instructed her to, but she told him that she had tried to change clothes outside and got called a $1 hoe. Lilia soon joined them and started scolding Vermeil for going into the boys' changing room instead of the girls. She also accidentally let it slip that she was jealous of Vermeil for being able to see Alto change clothes, since she also wanted to know what he was packing, but quickly went back to scolding Vermeil when she realized what she said. As they continued on their way, Alto stressed the importance of keeping a low profile as he didn't want to gain the attention of the student council. Vermeil told him not to worry about them because she could easily take them down, and Alto had to ask if her ears were decorations. Just then, they noticed the student council members approaching, and all the students stopped to stare at them. When they were almost close to Alto and the girls, he pulled them out of the way to allow the student council to pass, but Vermeil made sure to stare at Chris. That night, while Alto was taking a shower, he couldn't help but gush about seeing the student council members up close, and Vermeil, who he hadn't noticed standing next to him, also commented on how strong they looked. Immediately, he turned around in surprise. Vermeil pulled him closer, so their naked bodies were squished together, and she told him that she'd noticed his body earlier, but now that she was up against it, all she could say was that he was well built. Being the perfect gentleman, Alto tried to tell her that her fleshy plots were rubbing against him, but she asked if he wanted to surpass the student council members. He told her he did, said it had nothing to do with her trying to have her wicked way with him, but Vermeil told him that it did because as his familiar she gave him strength, so he could use her however he pleased. She then tilted his head up and said she'd make his dreams come true no matter what. Meanwhile, in an old-looking factory, Rex was getting the shit beat out of him by Chris, who was annoyed that he had lost a duel to an underclassman. The wimpy kid tried to stand up for him by saying it wasn't a duel, and that Alto had a human familiar. However, his words did nothing to stop her, as she walked to Rex and kicked him in the face, saying she only allowed him to join the Dragon Riders because he had begged her. She also said that his so-called dragon was a giant lizard with no functioning brain, and when she noticed her stained boots, she told him to lick them clean. She also told him that if he acted as the club's chore boy for a while, she'd let him back in, but Rex told her he wasn't interested in her twisted sense of forgiveness, as Vermeil had been right about them being a bunch of snobby holes, and said that he quit, causing Chris to kick him again. The next morning, Alto, Vermeil, and Lilia visited Rex in the infirmary because they had heard he was there. Rex turned to his loyal minion because he knew he had been the one to tell them, but the boy looked away, so Rex told Alto that he had gotten into a fight with someone. When they asked who it had been, the boy spoke up and blamed Alto for getting Rex kicked out of the Dragon Riders Club. Rex made him keep quiet and then asked Alto what he thought about dinosaurs, and Alto told him that even though he thought they were scary, he also thought they were cool. After leaving the infirmary, Alto headed straight to challenge Chris to a duel, and Chris complimented him for being ballsy enough to challenge her, but told him to back down as he had no idea what he was getting himself into. When Alto refused to back down, she told him she would beat some sense into him and summoned her dragon. Alto then turned to Vermeil, who stretched out her hand and pulled him in for a kiss, causing the entire student body and a jealous Lilia to scream in shock. Meanwhile, Rex's underline ran to inform him that Alto was dueling against Chris because of him. Back at the dueling ground, Alto tried using his crystals against Chris, but she destroyed them with her fireballs. She also began shooting fireball after fireball at him, but Vermeil used herself as a meat shield, and since she had a solid plot armor, she wasn't hurt badly. Chris had to point out that she was no ordinary mage, and Vermeil didn't deem her important to explain anything to. She then transferred some mana to Alto, who made bigger crystals and sent them flying towards Chris. Chris tried to counter it, but it ended in a big explosion, and when they thought it was over, she flew up on her dragon. Chris told him that if he wanted to win, he shouldn't have let her mount her dragon, and then she started shooting fireballs at him. Alto managed to dodge them, but eventually he got back to the edge of the dueling ground. Chris told Alto to give up and said if he begged, she'd make sure he got to keep Rex company in the infirmary. But Alto got angry and asked why she liked to look down on people. Chris told him it was because she was blessed with a dragon that could take to the skies and look down on the world. From the student council room, two executives watched as Chris rained fire on Alto and Vermeil, and one of them got up to leave, saying the duel was over. Back at the dueling ground, Alto realized Vermeil had taken the brunt of Chris's attacks and tried to put up a shield, but she stopped him and asked him to build up enough mana to knock the so-called Lord of the Skies down. Chris kept raining fire down on them as she said only the strong mages gotta have strong familiars. But the moment she said Rex was a pathetic weakling, Alto came to his defense, so she told him to prove her wrong by defeating her. Vermeil then told Alto to give her what she wanted before transferring mana to him, causing them to glow. Chris was surprised to see that Alto still had so much mana left even after casting so many spells. She found it interesting and shot a huge fireball at the same time. Alto created a bigger crystal. When the fireball and crystal met, the crystal exploded into different pieces. But when Chris looked down, Alto and Vermeil were nowhere to be seen. However, she noticed too late that they had used the pieces of the crystals to get up and try to shoot them out of the sky. Vermeil then dropped Alto, and he landed on the back of Chris's dragon before holding a crystal shard to her neck. The students who had been watching the duel couldn't believe their eyes and screamed in joy because Alto had won. After the duel, Alto was surrounded by screaming female fans, and as a jealous Lilia watched them, she tried to keep her murderous intentions away. Cheryl told her that it was only normal that he get fans since he defeated a gold square. She then pulled out a rock from God knows where and tried to go and smash some heads, but Cheryl held her back. Alto could only watch in shock, but his attention was drawn from her to his teacher, Mr. Obsidian, who called his name. Immediately the girls saw him. They flocked to him like sheep and began talking about how Alto had defeated Chris. Obsidian told them he knew all about the duel as he had also watched it, but told Alto that he shouldn't have challenged Chris on a whim. He said that if he had lost, only God knows what Chris would have made him do. Lilia came at that moment and tried to defend Alto's decision to duel, but Obsidian cut her off, saying he understood Alto had a reason. He said that as long as the reason was important, it didn't matter, but told him not to overdo it before leaving. As they watched him leave, Alto asked Lilia if Obsidian was the type of guy she was into. Lilia immediately got angry and tried to beat him up for implying that she was into older guys. Meanwhile, Chris was doing some community service as a result of losing the duel when Rex came to see her. She then bowed her head, apologizing to him for what she did. But Rex looked at her like she'd lost a few screws. Chris told him to accept it as it was Alto who made her come to her senses and understand that she was doing the wrong thing. Instead of accepting her apology, he grabbed the broom from her and started sweeping, after which he said he was glad they were on the same page. That night while Alto slept, Vermeil crawled onto him and started kissing him, causing him to scream when he realized what was happening. He then started scolding her for trying to take advantage of him.
I mean, it's alright,
But she told him she did it because she wanted a kiss. Alto told her to stop doing stuff like that and demanded she put some clothes on as she was butt naked. Vermeil reminded him that she was the one who allowed him to beat Chris, but soon started teasing him as she asked if he wanted to do something other than kissing. Alto moved back and told him that it was wrong to kiss someone when you weren't in love. Vermeil moved closer to him and said it wouldn't be a problem as she was in love with him. Alto was so shocked he didn't move, and Vermeil took the opportunity to push him down in bed. The next morning, Alto looked so tired because Vermeil hadn't let him sleep the previous night. She, on the other hand, looked happy, and Lilia commented on how she had a happy glow. As Alto watched them, he remembered her love confession and tried to shake the thoughts out of his head. However, when the girls called him over, he wondered if it was possible that a demon and a human could love one another. Later that day, Alto went to meet Obsidian in the library to ask if demons could fall in love with humans. Obsidian told him that he'd heard stories of women having babies for demons, and said there were lust-craving incubi and succuba. Alto asked if it was possible for a succubus to be attracted to a human, and Obsidian told him it was possible. Alto started feeling hopeful until Obsidian told him it would be because she wanted his mana. That evening during dinner, Vermeil noticed Alto wasn't eating, so she asked if anything was wrong. Alto tried to tell her everything was fine, but when she moved to grab his food, he suddenly screamed at her. Vermeil asked if it was his time of the month, and Alto asked if she was only with him because of his mana. Vermeil asked why he'd think that, but he asked her the same question again, so Vermeil pulled him into her chest. She asked if that was the reason he'd been acting weird, and he apologized but said it was because she was always trying to drain his mana. Vermeil told him it was because she needed mana to survive, but when he started sulking again, she kissed him. Alto pulled back and started complaining, but stopped when he realized she hadn't taken any mana from him, so she reminded him that he told her to only kiss someone she loved. She also complained about having to be the one to initiate the kisses and then pulled him closer, saying he could at least try to make a move on her, but Alto pushed her away and said he wasn't ready. The next day, Lilia asked Vermeil why she was glowing more than usual. Just then, Obsidian walked out of his office, so Alto went to speak with him and apologized for asking him weird questions. Obsidian told him it was okay and asked if he was curious because he had someone he was interested in. Alto admitted that he wasn't ready for something like that, and Obsidian joked about how all women were fiery demons. Later on, a female student went to see Obsidian in his office, and he told her that he needed her to do something for him. The girl hugged him, saying she loved him and would do anything for him. And as Obsidian hugged her back, she didn't notice the syringe in his hand. Sometime later, the girl was found frozen in her room, and the story made its way around the school in different versions, so two of the student council executives met to discuss the issue. Shinuji pointed out that she was the third student to be found in that condition, and Jessica added that they were all silver squares. They speculated that someone was behind it, and Jessica said their president was worried about the situation. Shinuji told her that it would take a while to investigate the situation, but Jessica insisted that he speed it up because she wanted the president to feel at ease. After she left, Shinuji told himself that Jessica had an unhealthy obsession with the student council president. Meanwhile, in Alto's room, he was trying to write a report about his familiar because their teacher had requested it. Part of the report was to write down the measurements of their familiar, but when he turned to face Vermeil, the lusty vixen had taken off her clothes. Alto complained, but Vermeil told him not to act like an obvious virgin and put his hands on her plots as she asked him to measure everything thoroughly. From the window, Lilia's familiar watched the whole exchange, after which she went to tell Lilia, who was hiding in some bushes with Cheryl, what she had seen. When Lilia heard it, she went nuts and declared that she was going to expose Vermeil for the shameless hoe that she was. Cheryl asked how she planned to get into the dorm room, so Lilia pulled out a bottle of invisibility potion along with a copy of Alto's room key. Cheryl was so surprised, but Lilia didn't seem to mind as she took off her clothes and gave them to Cheryl for safekeeping before she drank the potion. As she made her way into the dorms, she made sure to avoid getting seen by anyone. By the time she snuck into Alto's room, Vermeil had already hidden her horns and tail so Alto could take more measurements. Lilia went to stand by the bookshelf at the same time. Alto decided to get a book. She managed to stay quiet as he picked the first book, but when he reached for the second one, he almost touched her, and Lilia had to squat down. After that, Vermeil told him that he was getting closer to his dream of becoming a golden square, but he let her know that strength wasn't the only way to get a high rank. He also mentioned that when he fought Chris, he felt she was holding back from using her full strength because he knew she was stronger. He then told Vermeil that they had to go shopping, but before leaving, she added something to his report. Sometime later, while shopping for foodstuffs, Vermeil asked Alto to get her some desserts, but after he looked inside his wallet, he let her know that it wouldn't be possible as he was almost dead broke. Vermeil began sulking like a child, so Alto asked if she'd be willing to do some house chores, and when she said yes, he agreed to buy her a crepe. Vermeil was so happy that she stuck his face between her pillowy plots, right before she let him go and kissed him. Alto stopped the kiss. He tried to explain that they had an audience, but she didn't see anything wrong with it, and reminded him that he had told her that she could kiss the person she loved whenever she wanted. Alto still tried to explain his point, but she took it as he wanted her to take his mana, so she kissed him again and would have drained his mana if he hadn't pulled away. Just then, Rex's wimpy lackey came to find them and begged them to help him save Rex. Meanwhile, Chris was getting beaten by Rex, who looked like he had been possessed, and he told her she was an unworthy opponent. Chris refused to give up and shot a fireball at him. Rex walked through the flames looking like he was the devil himself, with the spikes that had grown from his shoulder. When he got closer to her, he kicked her but felt unsatisfied. So he activated a magic circle and used the stones to knock her into the air. Chris then fell back after the stones disappeared, giving Rex the chance to stomp on her as he demanded she fight, since she was a so-called golden square and the captain of the Dragon Riders. He then lifted her, but all Chris could do was weakly ask him to stop, just as Alto arrived with Vermeil and the boy. When Rex saw them, he threw Chris to the ground and told Alto that he wanted to pay him back for what he did to him. But Alto ignored him and ran to check on Chris, who told him to run. Alto asked Rex if he was the one who had put Chris in the state that she was in, and he told him he was the one. This pissed Alto off, but Rex kept saying how much he hated Chris as his mana started spiking dangerously, and Vermeil seemed to recognize what was happening. In his enraged state, Rex summoned his equally possessed familiar, so Vermeil started powering up too, which caused Alto's seal to glow. However, before either of them could do anything, a girl ran past them and pulled out her sword, which also happened to be her familiar, and used it to cut Rex up. The girl turned out to be the student council president, Elena, and when Chris sat up, she told her it was shameful of her to have been beaten by a weak opponent. Just then, Rex got back up and tried to continue the fight, but his body was too weak, so he fell back down. When Chris and the others went to check to see if he was okay, he lay on his face unmoving, however. Elena didn't seem to be interested in him, as she asked Vermeil if she knew what power Rex had been using, but Vermeil said she had no idea. 3 days after the incident, the student council met to discuss the recent attacks on the students and Rex's possession. Shinuji said it was clear after what happened to Rex that someone was behind it, but what wasn't clear was if the person was using dark magic or a drug. Before he could finish speaking, Chris got up and left the meeting room, causing Jessica to ask why she was so affected by what happened to Rex when she had been the first one to punish him. Shinuji explained that Chris liked to play rough with her toys, but hated it when others touched them. Elsewhere, Lilia was excited about the upcoming bronze exams, but Alto seemed to be down in the dumps, so she flicked his head and told him to stop thinking about what happened to Rex. She said if he failed the exam, the dinosaur-obsessed Rex would bitch about it being his fault, and that seemed to get Alto out of his slump. She also told him he needed to pass, so he could rub it in Rex's face when he woke up that they were now on the same level. Before Alto could tell Lilia that she was acting like a creep, Vermeil told him that she was feeling sick and would like to return to the room. Alto said he'd go with her, but she stopped him, saying he needed to go to the library to read for his exams, and walked away. When she left, Lilia pointed out that it was the first time the leech of a woman left Alto's side since she became his familiar, and Alto explained that since the incident with Rex, she had been acting strangely. Lilia told him not to worry about it, said they should take advantage of the time to study together. Outside, Vermeil was thinking of where she recognized Rex's power from when she bumped into Obsidian, who started telling her that was the topic of discussion among the teachers. However, Vermeil cut his useless ramblings short as she accused him of being behind what happened to Rex, but he denied it, saying she was imagining things. Vermeil told him to stop acting like a saint because she could smell the low tear clinging to him, causing him to ask what she meant. Vermeil didn't respond to his question, but as she walked away, she advised him to stop whatever plans he had as it was too much power for a human to handle. Obsidian asked if she would rat him out, but she told him that she didn't care and only thought to warn him of the danger he was putting himself in. She also added that he was free to carry on with whatever he was doing, but said she'd rip his soul to shreds if he ever tried to harm Alto. Obsidian was surprised by the threat, but since he was in his villain arc, he tried to play it off and said he knew she was the real deal, so Vermeil gave him the same advice before walking away again. But the twisted bastard managed to inject her with a drug, which made her mana start spiking as he told her he was taking her advice to do as he pleased. Back in the classroom, the seal on Alto's hand started to glow, and the next moment, they heard a large explosion from outside. Lilia went to open the window and see what was going on, but Alto could sense there was something wrong with Vermeil. Elena also sensed it and made her way to the place, but she was attacked by a paper doll, which used cloning jutsu to multiply itself before merging into one big one. Meanwhile, Vermeil had transformed into her true form, and as Obsidian stood watching her, he proclaimed that he had succeeded. Vermeil took note of the little weasel before and used her hand to send a wave of energy, but it missed him and destroyed the ground beside him. Obsidian was more than happy to witness how much power she possessed, and as he turned to face her, a black orb formed in his hand. He then used the orb to make a chain, which he wrapped around her neck and laughed like a crazy scientist. Alto arrived almost immediately and was so surprised to see Vermeil in that state that he just stood watching until Lilia arrived and asked what the creature before them was. Obsidian pulled on the chain, which made Vermeil fall to her knees, after which he said it was a wonderful sight to see a creature so powerful kneeling before him. Alto asked why he was hurting her, and Obsidian asked if he'd been born stupid or was only pretending to be dumb. Nevertheless, like every overconfident villain, Obsidian explained that he had created a magical means of causing madness, which had painstakingly condensed into liquid form. He said injecting the liquid into a person would make their powers run wild, and he was glad to see it worked well on demons. However, the slow-witted Alto still didn't understand what the madman before him was saying, so Obsidian had to come down to his level of dumbness and spell it out for him by saying he'd been the mastermind behind all the attacks. Alto couldn't believe what Obsidian had just revealed to him, but Obsidian didn't seem to care about his feelings as he raved about being able to control so much power. He then told Alto not to worry as he would be the best master Vermeil had, but before he could say more, the chain he was holding broke to pieces and Vermeil tried to end his miserable life, but Alto got between the two of them, using himself as a shield. This ended with Vermeil's hand going through his chest, and by the time she took her hand out, Alto fell on the ground in a pool of his blood. When Vermeil realized what she had done, she screamed and started growing bigger than she was. Obsidian was surprised to see that she had become more viscous and tried to run away, but luckily for him, Alto hugged Vermeil right before she could send Obsidian to the gates of hell. He told her not to harm anyone, and as she hugged him, she asked why he had done something so foolish. Alto admitted that his body had moved before his brain could react, but said he didn't mind because he was her master and would do anything to protect her. By the time he fell lifeless, Vermeil had changed back to her normal form. Lilia was in shock and asked if Alto was dead, but Vermeil assured her that she would take care of him. She then kissed him and used their combined mana to heal his wounds, which surprised Obsidian as he'd never seen anything like that before. The entire resurrection began messing with his head, so much so that he started talking to himself. Lilia and Vermeil just watched him in silence, but then he pulled out another syringe and injected himself, making him turn into a weird beefed-up monster with my eyes. He told Vermeil, since she wasn't rampaging anymore, he could easily take her down. When he tried to attack her, Vermeil smiled evilly and punched him, causing a large hole to open up on the right side of his body. Obsidian still refused to give up and took to the skies in an attempt to escape, but Chris made sure she stopped him, which allowed Vermeil to deliver the final blow. With Obsidian defeated, the skies cleared up and Alto finally woke up, but Vermeil didn't approach him as she watched Lilia bawl her eyes out while she hugged him. Later of their mana. He said they were going to have to transfer mana to the flame through the crystal, so they had to pour as much mana as they could into the flame. He also told them that the amount of mana they managed to pour into the flame would determine their scores before calling on the first student. While the others believed the exam would be a walk in the park, Alto knew there was more to it than the man had said, but Vermeil held his shoulder and gave him a reassuring smile. After the exam started, the students who went before Alto's group all struggled to supply mana to the flame, but when it was Lilia's turn, she had already figured out that she needed to channel her mana directly into the flame and not the crystal ball. She then summoned her familiar, and together they increased the flame, causing the other students to look on in surprise. Pharynx congratulated her for a job well done and said she had the top score so far, causing her to grin with excitement. The student who went next told Lilia not to get cocky and said he'd show her what real power was before channeling more mana into the flame. Cheryl went on next and wasted no time in showcasing her talents, but when it was Marcus's turn, he looked like he was going to shit his pants because of how much he forced himself to channel his mana. When he stepped off the stage, Pharynx's assistant said all the Ortigia students had done well, even though the poor excuse of a mage Marcus only managed to scale through. Pharynx, on the other hand, believed that the students were the worst set of apprentices he had seen. When it was Alto's turn, both he and Vermeil approached the stage, and the other students started talking about them. The assistant also tried to stop them, but Pharynx let her know that the academy had provided him information about Alto and said Vermeil was his familiar. By the time Alto touched the glass, he realized it wasn't an ordinary crystal and explained to Vermeil that although the crystal was constructed to guide mana directly to the flame, it wasn't as simple as that. He then walked around the crystal and touched the back, where he discovered a spot which would send his mana directly to the flame, so he asked Pharynx if he could channel mana from anywhere. Pharynx told him it was allowed, but was secretly impressed that Alto had caught on to the real test, which was to measure their abilities to decipher and understand magic formulae. He also noted that Alto had discovered the best spot to supply his mana, which surprised Pharynx as that was the hardest place to supply mana through. But Alto showed him he was the smartest kid on the block by channeling so much mana into the crystal that the fire turned silver. Pharynx was left with his mouth hanging open, but Alto wasn't done yet because Vermeil stepped closer to him and told him to scare the hell out of them. Alto did as he was told and channeled so much mana into the crystal that it broke into different pieces. Thinking he was going to be scolded, Alto began apologizing for destroying the crystal and asked if he'd failed because of it. Pharynx had no choice but to tell him that he had passed the practical exam then and there, even though his assistant wasn't happy about it. After Alto left with his friends, the assistant picked up a piece of the crystal and asked if it was defective before the exams. Pharynx assured her that nothing was wrong with the crystal and said that it was surprising that a young mage could break something that even platinum mages would find difficult to do. Outside, Alto and his friends sat down to have some tea, and his friends praised him for his ability to break the crystal. Cheryl said he was lucky he didn't have to pay for the damage, and Vermeil said that all he had to do was ace the written exam. Lilia then asked Marcus why he hadn't used his so-called secret weapon, and he told her that it was only for the written exam. The Featherbrain then went ahead to pull out a six-sided pencil, which he said was his key to success. Cheryl looked at him like he was the biggest fool on planet Earth, and Marcus tried to spare them from more of his stupidity by changing the subject. She said the practical exam was hard and was sure the written exam would be harder, so she asked if any bronze squares had ever gotten a perfect score. Cheryl told her that in all of the exam history, only one mage had managed to get a perfect score in every rank exam. Alto was surprised to hear it, but Vermeil assured him that a book-loving nerd like him was sure to ace the test. Lilia told him not to chicken out like Courage the Cowardly Dog and face the exam head-on, because it didn't matter who the top scorer was as long as they passed. Before the exam started, the two horny freaks found a hidden corner to trade mana, but as they were making out, Alto told Vermeil that he didn't need mana for the written exams, Vermeil didn't seem to care as she told him that she could feel that his heart wanted her, so the idiot simp continued kissing her. After their steamy makeout session, they made their way to the class where the exams would be held, and Alto told Vermeil. Just then, the jealous haircut guy passed by them, and Alto secretly wished him luck. After the guy disappeared into the bathroom, Vermeil begged Alto for another kiss. Inside the bathroom, while the boy washed his hands, he complained about how the Ortigia students were acting all high and mighty. Suddenly, he noticed a creepy Lite in the mirror and told him to get lost before trying to walk away. However, he didn't get far because Lite stabbed him, and as he lay dying on the floor, Lite took his exam ticket. Meanwhile, at the academy, Jessica and Elena were taking a shower after sword practice, and Jessica admitted that she was still suspicious of Vermeil. Elena told her not to worry too much because she believed Alto when he said Vermeil was good. Jessica then asked why a demon would give her heart to a human, and Elena said it was because they were in love with each other. Back in the testing center, Alto scolded Vermeil for making him late for the exam as they ran to the class, even though he had willingly agreed to another makeout session. When they made it to the door, he asked her to hang around as familiars weren't allowed into the hall. He then made his way to his seat, and just as he wondered who was to sit next to him, Lite came and took the seat. The exams soon commenced, and Alto took his time going through all the questions before starting. But before he started, he noticed Lite was dead to the world. Alto was surprised to see him nodding off and snoring loudly and wondered how the boy could be sleeping at such a time. However, he decided to focus on his exams instead of worrying about the young man beside him. But as he wrote, he realized the questions were something they would set on a silver square exam. The next moment, Lite woke up, and Alto was startled because he'd completely forgotten that the boy had been asleep the entire time. He then looked at the time and noted that Lite wouldn't have enough time to go through the questions. But Lite shocked him even further by finishing the exam before he could say the words Jack in the box. Lite looked over at his paper and told him to just write down his answers instead of explaining. Alto was so shocked by the clear disregard for the exam rules, but before he could say anything, the teacher scolded them for talking. Lite moved away and started sulking like a little kid as he complained about the stupid teacher ruining his fun. Alto told him to keep it down, as they were in the middle of an exam. But Lite told him it didn't matter because no one was going to complete the exam. Alto was about to ask the nutjob what he meant when another teacher came running in and asked the exam instructor to call off the exams because they found a student dead in the bathroom. The instructor argued that it wasn't possible because all the students were accounted for, but when he noticed Lite smirking like an evil imp, the words died in his mouth. Before the man could react, the floor of the room began to break and a headless golem rose with Lite on it. The loud sound was heard by Phalanx and his assistant, as well as Vermeil, whose first thought was to go save Alto. Inside the class, Alto asked Lite who he was, and he outright told him he was his enemy, after which he called him Demon Master. Before Alto could respond, the instructor demanded that Lite surrender as he created magic circles. Instead of responding, Lite used the golem to squash his arm like a bug and lift him. Fortunately, Phalanx got there in time and kicked the golem's hand to pieces before saving the instructor. Almost immediately, Vermeil burst through the window and asked Alto to back her up as she shot an attack at the golem. However, the golem blocked the attack, and Lite laughed maniacally as he complimented Phalanx for managing to break his golem. Phalanx in return said he knew who he was and called him Light of Heaven's Will, which made Alto remember what Cheryl said about the mage with the perfect top score. Phalanx then explained that Lite was the youngest mage to have ever been promoted to Silver Square. Simply put, all the mages gathered at the exam center were nothing but weaklings compared to him. Phalanx then asked why he wasn't planning to keep hostages, since he allowed the students to escape easily, but Lite said it was beneath him to do something like that. He then created a staff from a flower bud, which he tapped on the golem to make it bring out its big cannons and guns. After this, Lite asked if they believed they could take him down, but they all put on their game faces and stood their ground. Outside the building, Lilia was trying to go back and help Alto, as if he were a damsel in distress. The only thing standing in her way were the soldiers, who refused to let her pass through the doors. More soldiers soon arrived, and while they were speaking, Lilia ran past the ones at the door and into the building, so they went after her. The other soldiers also went in, as well as Marcus and Cheryl, but to their surprise, they all ended up coming back out. Cheryl immediately understood what was going on, so she explained that someone had cast transference magic, however. They didn't notice Lite's friend watching from a tree. Back inside, Alto and the others were getting their asses whooped, while Lite controlled his golem like a true maestro directing an opera. By the time he was done with them, the class had been destroyed and Vermeil was struggling to get free from the golem's hand. Alto managed to get back up and demanded Lite let Vermeil go before his seal began to glow. As he approached Lite, he recognized the golden mana surrounding Alto as the mana of a demon, which wasn't surprising as Vermeil was his familiar. Alto then fired crystal at the golem, which managed to break the arm holding Vermeil and set her free. As she fell, she noticed that aside from the golden mana, Alto was also surrounded by silver mana, and Lite laughed at him for being so serious as he created more golems, but Alto easily took them down. He also supercharged his mana before attempting to punch Lite in the face, but Lite summoned his knight, who pierced Alto's shirt with his lance and picked him up. Lite then walked up to him, and as he looked at him, he wondered how none of the Dubbuses in the academy had noticed where Alto's power came from. Alto then asked what he wanted Vermeil for. And that's when Lite realized he'd skipped the cliché villain speech. So he told him that they were going to use her power to destroy the world, as he was telling Alto not to get his panties in a twist over him using his familiar as a weapon of destruction. Alto used his bare hands to break the lance holding him up, and tried to attack Lite. What he didn't expect was for Lite to show his of fighting skill and wipe the floor with his ass, after which he told him not to die before the real fun began. Suddenly, there was a burst of dark light and Vermeil transformed into her demon form, saying she would end Lite. But before she could attack, she was suddenly bound by chains, which Lite used a magic key to lock, causing her to fall to the ground unconscious. Lite then tried to move, but Alto grabbed onto his leg and said he wasn't going to let him take Vermeil. This only earned him a kick, after which Lite ordered the knight to take him out. And as the knight prepared its blast, Alto tried to stand his ground. When the blast was released, Alto's bag began to glow, and the glow stopped the blast before it reached him. The bag then opened, and the book Vermeil was sealed and floated out of it, before opening up in front of Alto. As they watched, a magic circle appeared, and the woman Alto had seen in his dreams emerged from the book. Alto asked the woman who she was, so she introduced herself as the Mage of Beginnings and said she was the one who sealed Vermeil in the book. Lite asked what an old witch like her was doing there, and she explained that she had buried a part of herself inside the book after sealing Vermeil in it. Alto tried to pick a fight with her for sealing Vermeil, but she told him to calm his tits down and explained that Vermeil had asked her to do it, which surprised him. She then floated towards Vermeil and swiped her hand over her, which resulted in the creation of a magic circle. When Alto joined her, she told him that the only thing holding Vermeil back was her memory, which she had sealed away. She then asked if he was willing to accept Vermeil for all she was, and he told her that he was because he made a promise to stand by her, so she agreed to help him get to her. She gave him a key to unlock the seal, but Lite complained about getting left out and tried to attack them. However, they disappeared right before his eyes and ended up in an unknown kingdom. The spirit explained that they were inside Vermeil's memories and warned him that if he couldn't save her, his mind would be trapped there forever. The next moment, he heard the voice of a young girl. And when he looked in that direction, he saw a young Vermeil running towards someone with a flower crown in her hand. He watched as she put the crown on the head of a nun, who smiled and laughed with her, and the spirit told him that this was the happiest time of Vermeil's life. They then watched on as 3 other children joined Vermeil and the nun, so the spirit explained to Alto that they were her family. Inside the abbey, Vermeil almost choked on her food because she was scuffing it down like a pig. The older girl named Meal scolded her for it, but Vermeil told her she couldn't help it as the food was worthy of 5 stars. While they were talking about the crown, the 2 other children said they also wanted one, and everyone started talking all at once. That night, while the nun brushed Vermeil's hair, Vermeil asked her if the horns on her head meant she was a demon, and the nun told her yes, but said there was nothing wrong with it. Vermeil told her that Lilia had said demons were God's greatest enemy because they were bad, so the nun told her that not all demons did bad things just like her. Vermeil then asked why she was so nice to her even though she knew she was a demon, and the woman told her that they were a family. Alto was surprised to know that the nun had kept Vermeil's secret, so the spirit explained that in that era people were scared of demons, which was why she had hidden Vermeil's identity. He then asked why she decided to seal herself up when she had a family. The spirit just told him to prepare himself for what he was about to see next, because it wouldn't be nice. The next moment, he watched as some children threw rocks at Vermeil, saying she deserved to die because she was a demon, but Niel came to her rescue. After the children ran off, Niel noticed Vermeil's horn for the first time and was surprised Vermeil started crying and apologizing for keeping her identity a secret, but Niel hugged her and told her that she would keep her safe. Later on, the townspeople gathered at the front of the abbey, and as they threw stones at the doors, they demanded that the nun give them the devil's spun. Inside the abbey, the nun assured Vermeil that God would protect them from the angry mob and hugged her children to herself. However, things took a turn for the worse when a plague struck the town and a lot of people died. The people returned to the abbey, blaming Vermeil for the calamities that befell them, so the nun went out to speak with them. Meanwhile, Niel told Vermeil to run as far as her little legs could take her, so the townspeople couldn't find her. She promised that when things calmed down, she would find her, and it would be a family again. Vermeil began crying, and Niel apologized for not being able to protect her like she had promised to. She hugged her sister, and the others joined them as they said their final goodbyes. As Vermeil ran, she fell and began to cry, but when she heard the people coming after her, she hid behind a building. When the people didn't find her, they decided to return to the abbey, and Vermeil began to think of her family. She realized that if she stayed away, they would be in danger, so she decided to return and give herself up to the people. Unfortunately, when she got to the abbey, she was greeted by the hanging bodies of her family. The shock of losing her family and the continuous clamoring of the people made her scream in anger. She then transformed into her demon form, and by the time she turned back to her human form, more than half of the town had been wiped out. Vermeil sat in the middle of the wreckage crying and apologizing for what she had done. Alto felt sorry for her, so he descended and went to comfort her as she cried her eyes out. She then changed back to her adult form, told him that no one wanted her because she only caused death and destruction, but he assured her that her family had loved her. The world around them soon started burning, and Alto told Vermeil that even if the world turned their backs on them, he would always stand by her, as she was the Bonnie to his Clyde. Romeo. Sorry Alto then told her that he loved her and said she'd never have to be alone again. Alto also apologized to Vermeil and confessed his love for her, promising that she would never be alone again. He then kissed her, causing the chains that bound her to break. However, their make-out session was abruptly cut short when they were transported back to the real world. Lite was surprised to see them, and upon realizing that the chains had been broken, he vowed to take them out once and for all. He then merged his knight with another golem he summoned and asked Alto if he finally knew how strong Vermeil was now that he'd seen what she was capable of. When he told him that they were going to make good use of those powers, Alto asked him to shut up and said he had no right to say things he didn't know because Vermeil was more than a tool for him to use. Since he was a twisted bastard, he enjoyed the anger Alto felt, but said his anger couldn't save him from what was to come as he turned to the knight preparing to shoot Alto. However, Alto told Vermeil to give it her best, and the two Super Saiyan apprentices charged up their mana and combined it so they could take out the knight. Once Alto activated his magic circle, they both channeled their mana into the crystals, which pushed back the blast from the knight and took it out. Annoyed that they destroyed his toy, Lite decided to get serious, but before he could show them the stuff he was made of, Lilia stopped him. The moment she stepped out of a portal, she told him that their time was up. Before Lite passed through the portal, Alto demanded to know what their plans were, but Lite told him to keep guessing and promised to return to finish the fight. When Alto tried to go after them, Vermeil stopped him, and when he turned to speak to her, he noticed the spirit standing next to her, causing him to scream like a bitch. Alto learned from Vermeil that the spirit was named Fatima, and she told him that as long as he had chosen to stay by Vermeil's side, he should be prepared to have the world go against him. Alto assured her that nothing would make him abandon Vermeil and promised to get stronger so he could protect her, so Fatima asked him to keep his promise before disappearing. When she was gone, the building returned to its original form, and Lilia jumped on Alto the moment the doors opened. A few days later, Alto spared with Jessica, and she showed him that he had a long way to go before becoming a Knight of Camelot. Chris soon joined them and promised to go easy on him, but she did the opposite of that and gave him a royal beating. After their training session, Alto thanked them for helping him, and Jessica asked why he was trying so hard to get stronger. Alto told them he was doing it to protect the love of his life, and Jessica got all red in the face because of how he said it. Later that night, while Vermeil and Alto lay in bed, Vermeil thanked him for loving and accepting her for who she was. She also told him that she loved him, and Alto kissed her before the two proceeded to view some X-rated stuff. The next day during the student council meeting, Elena said they needed to work together to destroy the enemy, even though they were Platinum Square mages. Each member of the council agreed to do their best to protect the school and the students. Later that day, Lilia, Cheryl, and Marcus celebrated the fact that they had passed the bronze exams after it was rescheduled. However, Lilia was a bit surprised that the stupid bird brain Marcus had passed, but he'd assured her that it was because of his lucky pen. When she finally noticed that Alto was missing, Cheryl told her that he had gone off with Vermeil, making her curse the Queen of Plots. Outside, behind the school building, Vermeil and Alto were locking lips once again, and Alto tried to get her to stop. Vermeil then told him that since she was his familiar, it was his duty to take care of all her needs, including the special ones, and continued kissing him.